Hello, I'm Terri Broussard Williams, and welcome to another Salons that Inspire. Today, I'm going to introduce you to Stephanie Mash Sykes, who's the Executive Director of the African American Mayors Association. If you've watched this before, you know that we focus on the how and why you might build a movement. And if you don't want to build a movement, there's also ways that you can amplify and support them all around you. So that's just one of the many things we'll talk to Stephanie about today. Welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, Terry.
Well, I'm so excited to introduce you to everyone because you are the founding executive director of what we call AMA, the African American Mayors Association. And it's so rare that you get to meet someone that actually served as an executive director, from the founding moment through some of the hardest times in our country's history.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. It's exciting to be in this role. And it is actually one of those I was in the right place, maybe at the wrong time. I joke. But I was working for the former mayor of Sacramento, when the organization was founded. So it was really kind of a project out of his office that really turned into something larger. I tell this story all the time. I was actually, my background prior to this, I was an executive compensation lawyer. And so I was actually advising like legal and corporation and actually outlining employment specs for the executive director.
Wow.
And we thought we found one and it didn't work out. So I ended up, taking the role as interim and ending up working for Mayor Bell, who was our first full year president. He's the former mayor of Birmingham. And that was summer 2014. And that's
Wow.
when, Ferguson happened. We went out to
Mm.
Ferguson. We met with Black mayors. There's lots of mayors of smaller towns who weren't being heard locally. So we went out there, did a, site visit and talked to them about how we could be supportive as a, new organization. But that's the purpose that we exist, to lean in on issues and bringing the collective voice of mayors across the country together, particularly of issues of social justice and equity. So when he asked me and we had that conversation of should we look again or would it be something you're interested in doing, I jumped on it because I had built it, I knew the vision, and it was such an exciting moment to get started.
Well, I actually didn't know that
Yeah.
history. I knew that you founded it, but I didn't put the dates together to realize that Ferguson would have been your moment out of the gate.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and for, a lot of people that do watch these are definitely in politics, but some people are social impact strategists. It's one thing to build an organization, but it's another thing to do it when crisis and that organization's mission meet.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about how did you discern what was the right strategies? How did you engage your members? Or just, there's so many boxes you have to check to nail it and to get it right. I'd love to hear more about your thought process.
So early on, we were both growing. We had 30 mayors at the time. We now have over 150 mayors. And so it was, what do mayors need to feel heard? How are they not being heard or utilized in the best way with other organizations that may exist? And so the conversations with the board, I report to a board of 17 mayors, were really about how do we partner with the White House? How do we partner with NGOs? One of the things was making sure that the organization was launched in DC. So we wanted to make sure we were in DC. Historically, there had been organizations like in Atlanta, there are a lot of mayors in the Southeast, but we needed to be there. And so being able to do that, we launched with a heavy policy portfolio of social justice issues around policing reform, partnered on that first 21st Century Policing Task Force, went to a lot of meetings with the White House to talk about how mayors are working with their local police departments to really do community-centered policing. And so that's really how we started the organization right out the gate. growing as as we were engaging. And by engaging and really making mayors feel that their voice as Black mayors was unique and they were leaning in a unique way, I think that's how we were able to grow. I wouldn't say extraordinarily quickly, it's been building over 6 years, but
Mm.
that incremental growth was really about showing mayors the value of coming together, not just as mayors, but as Black mayors to lean in on those issues. Yeah.
And that scaling is so important when you're just starting a movement or a nonprofit because, it really allows you to show people that you can fulfill the mission and
Right.
that they should invest
Yeah.
financially or with sweat equity,
Yes.
you know? And you have to have that proof
Yes.
of concept moment and then
Yeah.
you can catapult from there.
There was lots of
It-
sweat equity. I was definitely moving tables. I was making badges. I joke now that we have a team and we're growing. We're four. It's going to be seven very soon. And I'm like, everything you've done, I've done. I put up a splash page before we had a web developer. And so just really willing to put the shoestrings together before we had the larger investments that we could grow. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was trying to even count back to when I first attended an AMA conference. You might remember the year. I feel like my first was in Houston, but maybe it wasn't.
Maybe in person in Houston. I know you started engaging
Yeah,
with us, I think, when Mayor Gilbert was a mayor and he was
that's
our
right.
president. Yeah, but I don't know if you actually had the opportunity to attend, but that's when we
Yes.
started to really engage. Yeah.
Because when I think back through those moments, like you have always been someone that's been impressive because you have seen an issue and take care of it yourself, or we've thrown out ideas and you're like, I can make that happen. There are just so very few leaders that aren't afraid to say yes. A lot of people lead with no's. And so I think that is part of the reason why you have been successful is because you've been able to lead with a yes.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I mean, we have amazing partners and you're one of them. I also am the GC, I'm the general counsel, and part of that is, thinking about how to. It's not no, it
Mhm.
is how do we get to that and how do you think of it as risk? And, you can do something that might not be exactly the way it should get done, but what's the risk? So really thinking about it
Mhm.
that way. And that's how I approach everything from a panel to a collaboration. How can we get it done? What's the detriment if we do it, if we don't? And how do we get, collective buy-in? But I think as a younger, scrappier organization, a lot of these, trade associations, municipal organizations been around for 100 years. We have to be creative. I mean, if we weren't creative, innovative, there would not be a space or a lane for us. So in creating a movement, whether it's this movement or who knows what I'll do in the future, it's about thinking about how do you fill the space and almost from a business perspective, what's your competitive advantage, right? Like, how are you different? What are you bringing? How are you being additive to the conversation? And that's how I approach even just a panel.
Yeah. Well, I hope y'all are taking notes because you just gave people a whole masterclass from know your value proposition,
Yes,
lead with a yes, and to be creative. Those are, three things that will help any leader succeed.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about this year because
Sure.
you are an in-person organization.
Mhm.
I love traveling with you all across the country, Atlanta, Houston, DC. Um, Seeing the people is just as much fun as having the food at your events. But this year called for different times.
Yes.
So you had to pivot and pivot really quickly because not only would it threaten how you engage your members, but it also threatened your bottom line. So,
Mhm.
what were the lessons that you learned through the pandemic, and how have you led as the ED?
Yeah. So we literally just as a off, like I have an office, I have a staff, and we're sitting in DC. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure if we're going to come back. Maybe we'll come back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, right? 14 days, right? That's what we thought. So just get your stuff, just most of the stuff you need, and then we'll see. And then there's a state of emergency called in DC. And then I have not seen my colleagues since March. So there's that. So, internally, you want to make sure your team is okay. Just it's mentally
Mhm.
taxing. So we have to make sure those engines are moving internally and that we're communicating as a team to get everything done. And then strategically, engagement is in person. So we had a conference that was scheduled to be in Atlanta. We had retainers and deposits. And so there was a lot of me, relying on my legal skills to like go through the
Mhm.
contracts and look at the termination clauses and all those things. So there's that
Wow.
bucket. And then there's a negotiation. First, we pushed the conference to our major conference, our major revenue generator, to September. And we saw that quickly was probably not going to happen. And so then we had to cancel again. And then we said, well, this is revenue. Well, the great thing about in virtual is that you don't have the costs. So really you have to look at how can you still make something of value for your partners to still invest in. So we decided to just have constant engagement throughout the summer, both our evergreen issues. We have a large business council and they cover a lot of different things, and then also topically. So we had an aggressive communication strategy. We have an outside firm that we engage to make sure that we were, first out on what a Black community should be thinking about. Let's demand that
Mhm.
data, this is actually one of the few moments we've been dealing with a lot of tough issues, lots of statements on condemning actions around policing. But when we started to talk about the data for COVID, and demanding the data, I had this sort of, for
Mm.
the first time in my work, this sort of like crisis of should we be directing as a Black organization to demand data by race when we know as Black people, once people see that, as we know, it is going to be majority Black people affected, will people no longer care? Right?
Yeah.
That will come out eventually, but I mean, we know that the pre-existing condition is race and all these things, right? Not obesity, it's that you're Black in America. And we were worried about it, but ultimately made the decision that you want to advocate for that because you cannot fly blindly. And so we were out there writing letters and also uplifting those letters and our conversation on in national media. So we were really successful for that. So we've been focused a lot on amplification of our messaging,
Mhm.
um, during this time.
Well, I mean, you bring up a really good point. So often people don't consider the laundry list of things you have to think through as you're strategizing and moving a message forward.
Mhm,
So that to stop and have that conversation of if we advocate for this,
mhm.
we know that our constituents are going to be impacted. So are we furthering our issue or are we hindering our issue
Absolutely.
by raising the question? It's such a leadership conundrum, right?
Mhm, mhm.
But and if you don't take that first step, and if you're not brave and really advocate from a place of knowing that you're doing right for the community, sometimes you can make the wrong call. So I applaud
Right.
you all for the way that you handled that.
Absolutely. No, it was tough, and we see that those numbers aren't getting better. But we now are pivoting to thinking about what's next and just starting to get in the conversations of our community and socializing these ideas of vaccinations and medical
Yeah.
distrust and all these things that I think mayors could be very valuable in leading the conversation.
Yeah, that are tied to systemic issues,
Mhm,
that are generations deep. I
mhm,
I love something about one the work that you're doing and the leaders that you get to do it with. So many times we think about issues and we tend to think of our congressional leaders first or the people that sit in DC. But
mhm.
really when we really dig into who are the leaders that can turn these systemic issues around? How might they get the work done? It goes back to that famous saying that all politics,
That's it.
is local. And our mayors are really the ones who are on the ground making decisions about, what businesses are going to be open, when are they going to be open,
Mhm,
how are
mhm,
we going to get money from the federal government to the hands of our residents, and so much more.
mhm, mhm.
And so, I don't think that people really recognize that. But that truly, a lot of the work is being done at the local level. Do you have any reaction to that?
I mean, that is why I'm in this space. I'm in DC, and why I have been committed to local government. Actually, my first internship in college was in the mayor's office of Philadelphia, and that's my hometown. And I was told, because someone calls, fill their pothole. It doesn't matter even if the mayor has authority over potholes or schools or trash. I mean, it depends on the size of the city. Sometimes it's at the county level, but they expect the mayor to show up and cut the ribbons and fix things. It doesn't matter, you're Democratic, Republican, independent, you need to fix my pothole. And that's the expectation. The level of accountability is extraordinary. And there are only actually a few executive positions in the country when you think about elected officials where they are making executive decisions. They are the CEOs of their jurisdiction. And that's mayors, governors, sometimes a county executive, and then the president, right? And everything else
Mm.
is more movement, conversation, law, regulatory, and those things are important. I've served in as a policy analyst at state level as well. But there is just something about local leaders and rising to the occasion in this moment, whether it's COVID, whether it's a flood, whether it's a hurricane. It's the local response that matters. And so that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm just so honored to work with the local leaders that I work with every day.
Well, and you're amplifying their message and
Mhm, mhm.
supporting them. And one way that you're doing that is through the new Our Mayor's podcast.
Yes.
I want you to tell everyone that's watching today all about this incredible podcast.
Yes, I'm so excited about it. Thank you for bringing that up. So it's the Our Mayors
Mhm.
podcast. It's available on all podcast platforms. And so we wanted to use this as a tool to amplify mayors of all city sizes. We get a lot of press calls. They're not always for the 1,000 population towns. So we're going to take a look at mayors of all city sizes, and we're going to just talk about conversations in depth that are really important. So we've talked about digital equity. We had a great conversation with two leaders, a mayor and a lobbyist, who actually are both church leaders. One's a first lady, one's a pastor, and
Nice.
they serve both of those hats, and how civic engagement is sort of tied still to the Black church and the importance of the Black church. So we just have great conversations that maybe a sponsor might not not sponsor, right? But it's important. It's important. We're going to talk about maternal health and statehood in DC and all these amazing things, and also like tech in the Black community. So the world is open, and we're going to talk about mayors and bring them together with subject matter leaders, subject matter experts, I should say, to talk about a range of issues that are just important to our community.
I love it. So I hope people not only listen, but they subscribe to the
Yes,
podcast. And
yes.
I'm gonna do it when we get off today. I've
Please,
listened, but I
please
need to subscribe myself.
subscribe and also
Yeah.
rate. Yes, yes. And it's my first foray into hosting, so I'm excited about that as well. So
Oh, well, it's incredible. I want to close things out by bringing it back to you. You are the leader that has turned so many moments this year into a movement from, getting your mayors on board to support the George Floyd Act
mhm,
to helping your mayors just navigate everything related to the pandemic and COVID to now helping them get ready for a change, in leadership at the federal level with a new president and administration.
mhm,
It takes so much out of us as leaders to navigate all those waters. I
mhm,
say you have to be healthy, happy, and whole really to lead through those types of moments.
mhm.
What's one thing that you learned about yourself in 2020?
Um, that's a great question. I've learned that, I may have just as many hours in my day as Beyonce. I mean, everyone says that in
We all do,
24
right?
hours, right? People say that. There's that meme that, oh, can you? I mean, she's busy, but there's days. I have two kids at home. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. The work does not stop. And, you have to navigate the personal with the organization really being in the moment that the organization was launched for. To really be at a pivotal part in our country, a pivotal moment in our country, that's really going to impact maybe generations to come for African Americans. And so you can't take your foot off the pedal. So I'm still trying to get naps and sleep where I can, but I'm hopeful. I see a light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm just so fulfilled, knowing that there's work to be done, and that I can be a small part of that in moving our community forward as we think about recovery. So that's what sustains me. I have more hours than I thought I did. I thought I was tired before, but And I've also learned that, a little lip gloss goes a long way. So just perk up your day.
Ain't that the truth?
Yes.
I say all the time, like when I need my, armor, it's usually Spanx, but that was when we were like out in the world and red lipstick. And if I have Spanx and red lipstick on, like everything is possible.
I
Not
got
anything,
I
everything is
know.
possible.
I know. Sephora and I have become very good friends over because it's just like, hey, I can't really get out. I'm not, going to buy a new outfit, but I can buy new lipstick and I'm going to lean into that. I'm a woman leader and and enjoy that. And I'm okay with that authenticity. And that's what's making me happy and getting me through right now. So that's what I do.
I know that's right. I've had 3 Sephora shipments this week, but we
Okay.
won't
So
even get into that.
you may have me topped.
Well, thank you so much just for your energy, the insights, and your inspiration. I know that people that are watching will definitely enjoy, and hopefully, they will follow you at Our Mayors on Instagram, on Spotify, everywhere you can get the podcast, and all the places and all the things.
Oh,
So
thank
we'll,
you. I
we will
appreciate it.
we will watch you all in 2021, and I personally can't wait to see y'all again.
You as well. Thank you, Terry. It's always, always a pleasure.
Well, thank you for watching Salons That Inspire. Hopefully, you learned how to build a movement, support a movement, and amplify movement through today's conversations. I hope that you will also turn to Movement Maker Collective on Instagram, as well as on LinkedIn, and our website, movementmakercollective.com. There, you will also learn how to build, support, and amplify movements because each of you are a leader that can turn a moment into a movement. See you real soon.